See, I was unemployed, living on a pot farm, missing a front tooth, recently broken up with.
Chris Kalman is a longtime climber. He's the executive director of Friends of Cochamó, and he's just kind of the classic dirtbag dude who's just been around the scene forever.
He's also now a dad. You may hear his son in the background. That year, though, he was leafing through an alpinist magazine.
And my buddy Grant, he and I both read it sort of separately, but Cochamó in that article was described as El Dorado, the golden place. But sort of more generally, it was kind of positioned as the Yosemite of South America. And you could go down there in the winter when it's cold and kind of miserable in most of the states, if you're not a skier, which we weren't. And you can go climb big granite domes. So Grant kind of laid the foundation, and I was like, okay, yeah, let's do it. Spent what little money I had on a plane ticket and planned to get a new tooth in Argentina.
Prepare for landing, thank you.
And you get to the town of Cochamó, figure out your taxi to the trailhead, and start hiking. You're exhausted and you really want to see some granite walls. Big, beautiful granite. That's what you've gone halfway around the world for. And you don't get your first glimpse of anything resembling granite or rock climbing until you've been hiking for a number of hours. And the number of hours really depends on how much it's been raining lately, because if it's been raining a lot, you're going to be going through knee deep and at times possibly up to waist deep in mud. And you're in the middle of a coastal rainforest, surrounded by nothing but greenery, and you go through that for hours. And then you finally enter this clearing, which I don't know why there is a clearing there, but there just is. And you look up and you get your first glimpse of these walls. You're like, this is it. This is why I'm here. And then it's back into the forest. A few kilometers later, you finally make it to La Junta, which is where the major campground for climbers is. And that's when you start to see Cerro Trinidad, the Amphitheatro. You get a good look at Arco Iris, Capicua, Cerro La Junta. You see all these different walls in all these valleys. And the camping La Junta itself looks like something out of The Sound of Music. It's just this beautiful, idyllic, green pasture. There may be horses in it grazing from the arrieros who might be carrying your bags up. And you're just like, wow, this is the coolest place on the planet.
Alex, I think you and I have both been fortunate to have been surrounded by people who have done really difficult, really inspiring things with their lives, who have manifested moments that, almost seem impossible, right? And I would include you in that group. Often, I think the rest of the world gets to witness these sort of impossible acts through media. And when we look at it, it appears as if this achievement is this singular moment where the impossible becomes possible. But when reality, it's like the tip of a more fascinating story, more fascinating iceberg, so to speak. But the truth of it is, difficult things take so much time to happen.
Totally. So much work. Yeah, that's the thing is I think impossible things, nothing is really, very few things are impossible. Really just things are quite difficult, and people are not willing to put in the time and effort required to do a very, very difficult thing, or to figure out how to do a difficult thing, or to risk failure over and over as you slowly chip away at a very difficult thing. But, it's like practically everything in life is possible.
Today, we bring you a collaboration between the reporting team, who works on the Endangered Spaces series on the Dirtbag Diaries, and Climbing Gold. This is a story about doing a seemingly impossible thing, creating a next Yosemite National Park. In a time when there are so many difficult realities, there is a group of climbers, conservationists, thinkers, who find themselves at the cusp of doing something truly brilliant.
This is the story of Cochamó. It's unfolding as we speak, and you have a part to play. I'm Alex Honnold.
I'm Fitz Cahall.
This is Climbing Gold.
Alex, what do you know about the legend of El Dorado?
I don't think I know anything about I mean, I know the legend of El Dorado is like the city of gold, or like, all the conquistadors searching for gold in the New World.
So El Dorado, it's this powerful legend that fueled almost 200 years of European exploration, colonization, and frankly, genocide in the Americas in the 15 and 1600s. The lure of riches and a civilization dressed in gold pulled the Europeans deep into South America, into the jungles and the mountains. And I mean, it was like they first mapped the upper reaches of the Amazon because of that search.
And what does that have to do with Cochamó?
Well, like in today's world, El Dorado is parlance for a place of mysterious, infinite wealth that rewards only those willing to make the difficult journey. If you're a business person, that might mean you do something very difficult and you're rewarded by making a lot of money, loads of it. And if you're a dirtbag climber with a missing tooth, it brings to mind the opportunity to find a place like Yosemite in the late 1950s, unclimbed walls, perfect rock, hassle-free camping, an untrammeled landscape, and a chance to make a name for yourself.
Yeah, I can see that.
I worked for Outward Bound in Chile, in between Chile and Argentina, right around 99, 2000 to 2003. And so I was running courses and running a mountaineering program in Chile. And I'd heard about this incredible valley. Again, it's a North American-centric way to say it, but the so-called Yosemite Valley of South America. More the Chileans like to say that Yosemite is the Cochamó of North America.
Brady Robinson is a longtime climber who most notably ran the Access Fund for a decade. He's also the chairman of the board of the Honnold Foundation, fun fact. So he's a good friend of mine. Now he is working with the Freya Foundation, which is focused on scalable conservation solutions that protect wild places. Though I think maybe Brady's real claim to fame is that he was Jimmy Chin's first partner in the Big Mountains, but then he just didn't quite make it the way Jimmy did.
Brady will appreciate being thrown underneath the bus.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure.
Exactly.
It was 2002, and at that time, only a handful of climbers had ever laid eyes on Cochamó. But the word of an untouched valley had slowly begun to spread.
At that time, we were running courses, but we were exploring new places to go. There's a community called Cochamó. We were there, we were poking around, and this guy told us, yeah, there's a path that goes up La Junta Valley, and it totally goes into the Rio Blanco Valley, and you guys will be fine. And he pointed it to on the map, and so we rented horses, went in, and within the first hour, we were like, oh my God, there is no trail here at all. And so there was this like go or no go moment. And so we just decided to go for it. And we started marching up the river, the Junta River, because that's the only place you could make it work. There's no bushwhacking, it's just too tight. And then the next day we marched all the way up La Junta Valley. The only time we actually bushwhacked was around waterfalls, but otherwise we stayed in the riverbed. And at the top of the valley, we came upon a stand of Alerce trees. Like there's this little cirque up there. And Alerce trees are sort of like the redwood trees of the region. They live to be 2,000 to 3,000 years old. In fact, there's one that may be 5,000 years old. So it's a potential candidate for one of the oldest, if not the oldest, living thing on the planet. And when you're in the presence of these trees, you can just tell. There's just something about them. And two things struck me at that moment. One is this is way too pristine and hardcore for Outward Bound students. It was really hard to get there. And if we marched 12 kids through there, like it would just trash the place. And there was no, like the obvious place where you'd build a fire, the obvious place where you'd go camping, nothing, no sign of anybody. And it just blew my mind that it wasn't a protected area. I just couldn't believe it, that there was someplace that amazing that wasn't protected.
Why is that area so beautiful?
This is where the Andes meet the fjords. It's the first part where both meet. So it's a really wild nature place, very new accessibility because the roads that go inside the Cochamó district are from 2005.
Jose Claro is the board president of Pueblo Patagonia, and they have been protecting the region for nearly 20 years.
Jose is from a nearby town 2 hours from Cochamó.
So all the local community here, they are living in the mountains since more than 100 years. So for 100 years, they have maintained a kind of mountain culture, but mixed with a gaucho culture, if you know who are gauchos in Argentina. So the place is very unique.
Roads change a place, sometimes for the betterment of the communities, and sometimes not. But the road for sure made it easier to access the small village of Cochamó, and it starts to open up this place to climbers, to tourists, and to other forces.
Soy Tatiana Sandoval.
I'm Tatiana Sandoval. I was born in Cochamó, and I live in Cochamó.
Mis padres también.
Her family has lived in the area for generations, and she is president of the Cochamó Valley organization that works with local families to protect both the area and the community's way of life. Today, she and her brother, Fabian, run horsepacking support for visitors.
Lugar que tú puedes verlo con un...
It's a place where you see very little human impact. It's never been exploited, and about, 70% of the forest here is a native forest, in many places primary forest. And the population is small relative to the area of the place. The few people who live here have been able to coexist with nature in a way that's minimized impact. So today, I could say with certainty that you could drink water from any river. There's no air pollution. Consider that the community is made up more or less of 300,000 hectares, and the last census registered 4,300 people. 4,300 people over 300,000 hectares. When I was little, I remember people would move around Cochamó on horseback. There was just one guy who had a really old Jeep, and he'd take it out once a week. And it was a whole event for us kids. We'd be running behind that Jeep because we never saw cars.
Un evento para nosotros los niños y corríamos detrás de ese Jeep porque nunca veíamos autos.
So this is a broader region, roughly the size of Yosemite National Park, with a few thousand people spread across a few villages who have lived there for generations. They've drank water right from the rivers, and they've been eking out lives ranching. The forests, they have these ancient trees, free-flowing rivers, soaring cliffs, and an intact ecosystem. In 2005, the road arrives, and the climbers weren't the only one hoping to leave a mark. That's the backdrop that Chris walked into when he traveled there in the winter of 2008-2009. So Chris arrived to sunshine and a Sound of Music moment in La Junta campground, and then it proceeded to rain for 14 straight days.
I actually left Grant up there because I also had an appointment at a dentist's office in Bariloche to get a new tooth put in, which was going to save me money in the long run on the trip compared to doing it in the States. And I hiked out in the middle of, one of the biggest deluges I've ever seen in my life, and got to the town and got dial-up internet to figure out where my appointment was going to be and when. And it was canceled. The guy said, I can't do it. I haven't gotten the parts. And I was just totally despondent. I didn't know what to do.
Chris was a little overwhelmed, just trying to decide if he should go home instead of festering in the rain. But he had to deal with his tooth, so he goes to the airport, figures out his options. see if he can change his ticket. He does the math, and he realizes it's cheaper for him to just stay and get the tooth fixed a month later than go home. And so, on a complete whim, he extends his stay in Cochamó by a month.
I emailed the dentist saying I'll come a month later, get those frickin' parts. And I bought a bunch of food and went back up to the valley and got there just in time for this big party from our German friends. And then the skies like magically materialized in beautiful sunny weather. Grant and I got to climb Bienvenido a mi Insomnio, which is 1,000-meter 511, which is what we had come to do. Climbed a bunch of other great things together, and then he left, and I teamed up with my now really good friend, JB Hobb, who was kind of one of the most prolific new routers in Cochamó at that point. And we teamed up to put up a new route called No Hay Oyes, which was my first experience new routing. And it's a 6-pitch 511A that's become one of the most popular climbs in the valley. So that experience was probably the coolest thing I'd ever done in my life. And so when JB and I started on our route, No Hay Oyes, we got to the top on like day 2. You know, we fixed a few pitches and then topped out. And I was like, all right, cool. Should we go down now? And he was like, no. Now we have to prep the route for other climbers so that they have a good experience. And I was like, well, why? Like, why does that matter? And he was like, because everybody that comes here and climbs and has a good experience is a potential advocate later when Cochamó needs it.
When did you go to Cochamó?
I think I went to Cochamó in 2012. Now, in retrospect, having traveled to a lot of other places in the world that are labeled as like the Yosemite of wherever, I'm like, realistically, none of them are Yosemite, and Cochamó probably is second place. You know, like Cochamó actually is pretty close and pretty darn cool. But I think at the time I was just a little too snobbish about it, where I was like, well, this isn't real Yosemite. And now I think if I went back there, I'd be like, oh, like these are incredible granite walls. Like this is still really freaking cool. But I think that going to Cochamó was basically my first experience with temperate rainforest, with really wet, dense forests that aren't tropical. And I still haven't spent that much time in terrain like that. But basically, it's a really difficult place to live and to camp. You know, it's just kind of full on with the rain and like bushwhacking in the mud and everything. And so I was kind of like, man, this is a lot of work compared to going to Yosemite, where you just live in your van and it's super easy. You know, because we went to like the middle of nowhere in southern Chile, and I was like, this is so far from everything. But then that's kind of the appeal too. So I mean, I don't know. I'm sort of interested to go back to Cochamó now as a slightly more well-traveled climber with a broader perspective on things, and I think I'd be more impressed now.
When Grant and I went down there, I think we met every climber that was there. There was probably 20 of them or so. We all camped together and climbed together, and it was spectacular. But one of the things that, like right when you got into the Camping La Junta, back then there was this old building called the Fogón, which you could have little fires in there and dry your clothes and store your food. And on the wall of the Fogón was a poster that was talking about how the Rio Cochamó had been slated for a dam.
Locals had defeated the proposal, but the reality registered with Chris.
You're a stone's throw from this river, which is like the most beautiful river you've ever seen. And the gears turning in your brain trying to imagine that damned was just a moment of total dissonance for me. I couldn't fathom it. I thought like it was hard to imagine that it was actually real, that someone would actually have tried to dam that. But then, you know, of course, you start talking to the locals and talking to the campground owners and learning a little more. It was a very big concern for people living in the valley and in the town. And I don't think like you could have come out of that experience not knowing anything about the conservation situation down there and not caring. It's so funny to me when I think back on it, because had the dentist had those components, as he called them, which I needed for the tooth, I never would have gone back to Cochamó. I'm pretty certain of that. And I think a lot of people have this experience in Cochamó where they go, they get rained out. They're like, I don't get it, whatever, I'm going to go somewhere else. So it was just like a moment where my entire life shifted based on, you know, one email or one delayed package. I mean, I'm 39 years old now. That was 13 years ago. So that little tiny glitch of the, you know, the components not arriving on time or getting the email, That led to me spending a third of my life thus far, and pretty much my entire adult life, utterly focused and enamored with this place. I think I was at a point in my life where I wanted to be a part of something that I cared about, and I wasn't sure what that would look like or where it would be. And I was just ready for that. And so that seed was planted year one.
We'll be back with more after the break.
Hey everyone, it is that time of year. We need your shorts, your stories, because you power this show. We hear from so many of you that one day you're going to submit your short and send it to us at the Diaries. Guess what? That moment, it could be right now. So make it a New Year's goal or use it as an excuse to take a break from Uncle Joe at the holidays. You make this community, your voice is valued. You can find all the information you need at our website, dirtbagdiaries.com. Click on the Write Us tab where you can find instructions and the submission form. Pay attention to it. It helps the cause. Trust me. Link is in the show notes, so take a moment, click on it, consider it, and then get to work. You've got until January 19th to send us your short. Once again, it's dirtbagdiaries.com/write us. Thanks. Do you have a resolution to adventure outdoors more this year? Make it happen with Sierra Club Outings. Leaders in conservation-focused active outdoor adventures, Sierra Club Outings hosts over 250 small group trips every year where you can backpack, kayak, raft, volunteer, and more. These trips fill up fast, so reserve your spot at sierraclub.org/outings and use the code DIRTBAG to get $100 off. With Sierra Club Outings, it's more than just a trip. It's an adventure with a cause. We'll put a link in the show notes. Check out all the incredible trips they have and make that resolution happen.
Roberto Hageman is a businessman from Chile. He was maybe a big part of his life related with mining and energy projects in Chile and maybe other parts of the world.
Here's Jose Claro from Valle Patagonia again.
He was one of the shareholders of this dam project that we fight for 10 years.
After locals defeated the first proposal to dam the Rio Cochamó, Hageman and a group of investors spearheaded a new hydroelectric project on the Rio Manso, just to the southeast of Cochamó Valley.
He was the face, the project, saying this will be a good project for the county and also for Chile because energy prices are very high and this will lower the prices. If this dam, for example, was connected to the transmission line, you can do more than 20 other dam projects in the Cochamó district. So that was the importance to stop this first project because they will make the first transmission line.
So it's worth doing a little bit of explaining about the region. This section of Chile, it remains one of the wildest on the planet. Cochamó Valley is part of a bigger region known as Hacienda Puchiguín. Hacienda Puchiguín is surrounded by dozens of river valleys and hundreds of thousands of acres of untouched forests surrounded by national parks, many of which were spearheaded by Doug and Chris Tompkins.
So Chris and Doug Tompkins are noted conservationists, environmentalists who've purchased quite a lot of land in South America and then turned it back over to their respective state governments there in the form of national parks. Doug Tompkins founded the North Face way back in the day and then made quite a lot of money through Esprit, another fashion brand. Chris Tompkins ran the company Patagonia for a while. And then the two of them got married and ran Tompkins Conservation, which is, responsible for protecting tons of land in South America. Doug unfortunately died in a kayaking accident a few years ago, and I met him like a couple weeks before that. He took me out in his small plane, like the parks that they were buying and the land that they're buying is so vast. It's kind of like Alaska or other places where there are no roads, there's no infrastructure, and so they just get around by small plane. And he was flying with his knees, like controlling the plane with his knees, and then he held a camera in one hand, he'd be pointing at things and like, look at that volcano, like that's never been climbed, that peak's never been climbed. And I was so motion sick, I was dying because it's like the plane's all weaving around these peaks, and it's like, this is insane. And then we finally landed somewhere, we were like going somewhere for lunch, and we landed at this little grass runway somewhere, and get out. I immediately got out of the plane and puked in the bushes because I was so sick from all his crazy flying. But it was this pretty incredible couple days that I spent with him, because at the time I was really struck by what an absolute curmudgeon he was. It's kind of like an old classic, like cranky old man that is almost feudalist, like nihilistic about the state of the environment. And I just remember being struck by the contrast where I'm like, here's somebody who's doing so much to protect the natural world and help save the environment. It's kind of like, how can you be doing all this incredible work if you don't have some kind of optimism or hope for the future? But maybe that's just the nature of being a curmudgeon. Being an old man is like you just know how to gripe about things. And just to be fair, I mean, I only spent a few days with Doug Tompkins, and then he died shortly thereafter, which I was really shocked and saddened by. And so who knows if he was just particularly cranky those 2 days, I don't know. I can't pretend that I knew him well, but it was just a very powerful couple of days with him.
In a lot of ways, Hacienda Puchiguin was the last piece of a broader puzzle. If it could be protected, it would complete a 4,000-mile wilderness corridor. But the history of the place made it difficult. 100 years ago, Hacienda Puchiguin was formally created when 7 families petitioned the government to cede them the land to work and develop, 325,000 acres.
So there was 7 owners, they died, and all the families inherited their property rights, and then they die, and then they die, and then there was 200 owners.
So as Hageman starts pushing the dam and the power project, he realizes that there may be other ways to make money.
So he see this opportunity, and he started buying one by one of these property rights of Hacienda Puchiguin. So at the same time, he bought the water rights for building his dam project, he started buying these property rights.
Hageman starts quietly and steadily buying up each parcel. It's a logistical nightmare that he puts time and millions of dollars into. It's almost as if he was hedging in case he lost out on the dam. He could potentially use the land for large-scale tourism or development or mining projects. Slowly but surely, he starts chipping away at the project, pulling at different threads to ensure he gets a return on the investment.
And then every year I came back, the situation continually built and built and built, where it was like, wow, we're facing huge threats. Like, oh, now we're talking about a dam on the Rio Manso, and now we're talking about power lines across the estuary, and now we're talking about the rescinding of the Zona de Interés Turístico. And we would have all of these individual threats that everyone would gather to try and attack that. So it was like the dam on the Rio Manso. Okay, all of our effort and energy into that. Declaring Cochamó as Zoit, all of our effort into that. Sanctuary status, all of our effort into that. And it just felt like fighting sort of a multi-headed hydra. You cut off one head and there's 5 more to take its place.
At the same time, Cochamó, its forests, its free-flowing rivers, granite water slides, and towering cliffs, they're no longer a secret. In that following decade after Chris's first visit, the new routes went in. Fed with Instagram images, backpackers and college kids came from around the world. It was a beautiful place, one that was worth visiting. And while everyone was a potential advocate, unchecked tourism was becoming its own problem.
Cochamó was not going to stay this beautiful, pristine, perfect, untrammeled, human-free wilderness forever. Something was going to give. Something was going to change. Either it'll become a tourist destination, or it'll become a hydroelectric dam and reservoir, or it'll become an area for quarrying or real estate development, whatever, right? Like, humans never find something that's beautiful and resource rich and just leave it alone. At least like white humans don't do that.
La temporada 2016-2017
Here's Tati again.
vino mucha gente, mucha.
In the 2016-2017 season, a lot of people came. A lot of people. It was like, we'll go to the Cochamó Valley for a good time, to party. We'll go to this place because basically there were no restrictions, there was no police, and pretty much the whole sense of the place had been lost. That's when something clicked in my head that was like, we have to do something. And that's when we started the Cochamó Valley organization, to start to raise awareness about how to care for the valley, and that this is a place that you come to connect with nature, not to drink a box of wine.
Tati and her brother Fabian and the locals were increasingly having to respond to these threats. There were Hagamon's efforts, and then the reality that their idyllic home had become an international destination. The organization set up a little visitor center at the entrance to the valley, encouraged visitors to book reservations at La Junta campground in advance. Meanwhile, Hagamon kept pushing, quietly using his resources to build infrastructure that would set the table for a dam on the Rio Manso. Locals were aware that Hagamon was now openly acquiring water and mining rights and slowly buying parcels of land. What was clear is that the world had come to Cochamó, and there was no going back.
I remember sending emails to Doug Tompkins back when he was alive, saying, hey, I see you guys bought like Parque Patagonia, you've bought Pumalin, like this one's cooler than all of them. You guys should buy this. And amazingly, like Doug Tompkins actually wrote back to me and was like, you know what, we're not going to be involved in this. We have our hands full with too many other things, but good things happen when people organize and enough good minds put their energies to a cause. And I was always like, well, that was really sweet that you wrote back, but it's kind of a brush off. And I don't know if I agree that good things happen when enough good minds put their efforts to it.
Chris felt the doubt creep in, that the fate of Cochamó and Hacienda Puchiguin would go the way of so many other special places on the planet. He'd forged deep relationships over the previous years, worked in his free time to support Tati and Fabian's efforts. In 2018, he founded Friends of Cochamó to support the work being done on the ground by locals. But it was hard to see how this ragtag coalition of local Chileans, grassroots environmental groups, and climbers could compete against Hagamon and the drumbeat of development.
Eventually, Hagamon would do whatever he wanted with the land, whatever it was, right? Private park, or build a road into the valley, or, dam a river, or he had mining claims purchased, so, make a mine up there, timber operations, whatever, just whatever he wanted. And I don't think I was alone in that pessimism or cynicism.
A funny thing happened at the tail end of one of Chris's climbing seasons down there. He got an email. Roberto Hagamon hoped to meet Chris. Could they meet in Santiago?
Had about 12 hours between when I learned about the meeting and when it happened to prepare myself mentally. And when I met with him, he was super nice, super cordial, told me he reminded me of his son, who's a climber, by the way, has climbed in Cochamó and Yosemite. And we had a great conversation. He presented me with a large map, which I still have to this day, carried it through the airport all the way back to the States, that showed his holding Hacienda Puchiguin as a park. And it had all of these cute little, caricatures of fishermen and climbers and things like that on it. But what it didn't have was a road into the valley or a private real estate development that he was maybe thinking of putting in on around Lago Gormaz Vidal. Any of these things that were the things we were all really scared about. And so I kind of asked him, I was like, well, what's your opinion about the valley? And he told me that, he thought that it wasn't a bad idea to put in a road. He understood that a lot of people were opposed to it, but that, the better the access, the more people could come and enjoy the place. And I believe he did cite Yosemite Valley, as a comparison. And I just couldn't agree with him. I said, all right, well, I have to disagree with you. Like, I don't think that the ecosystem is the same. I don't think that the valley itself is the same. The situation is not the same. This is not the place to put a road, and this is not the time to do it.
They shook hands. Chris got on a plane. Hagamon went back to work, making his map a reality.
We'll be back with more after the break.
Pueblo Patagonia is an activist organization that has been putting layers of protection on the region and preventing bad things from happening. So when Roberto wanted to build the hydroelectric dam in the Rio Montes, he put millions and millions of dollars in infrastructure. He had a lot of sunk costs there.
Here's Jose.
We always did our work in the courts. We give this battle in the Supreme Court. They take the permission of building the dam project, so we won.
He didn't walk away from that project easily. Members of Pueblo Patagonia personally sued him, and what ultimately killed that project was he violated some environmental laws in building a road up the Rio Montes to create the infrastructure that would make a hydroelectric dam even possible. And so they stopped that from happening. They have stopped any number of things from happening in Cochamó. So they've been scrappy, operating on a pretty small budget.
In 2017, Chilean courts sided with Pueblo Patagonia. After 10 years of trying to push the hydroelectric project on Rio Montes through, it was a major setback for Hagemann. He'd likely invested tens of millions of dollars. But there was, for Hagemann, a silver lining. Through it all, he'd finished reassembling Hacienda Puchiguin, piece by piece, and he now owned one of the largest private land holdings on the planet. If you're a business and you've invested 10 plus years and millions of dollars to create a product, what do you do when it's finally done? You go to market. In October of 2018, the real estate wing of Christie's auction house had a unique offering, accompanied with a produced 3-minute Facebook video. Typically, Christie's real estate arm is serving up mansions in Aspen or a Mediterranean villa. They don't typically come with a Yosemite Valley in the backyard. Hacienda Puchiguin was something outside the norm, and the list price was $150 million. The listing remained up for a few months, but then came down, almost like a shot across the bow. In 2022, Hagemann put it back on the market, and this time it stayed on.
So when this was public, everybody, not only in the county, but here in Chile, they say, hey, something is going on here. They are selling 1/3 of the Cochamó County. It was another threat for the Cochamó County. What if there is a buyer that wants to do mining or forestry or real estate everywhere, or I don't know, big projects?
For those seeking to preserve Cochamó and the local way of life, the Christie's listing felt ominous. And while $150 million is a massive sum, I think it's also worth putting this in context of the 1%, right? Amazon's founder, Jeff Bezos, he built the super yacht, the Kourou, and it reportedly cost $500 million to make. Alex, I sent you some links from a few real estate sales that I found in the past years. Michael Jordan's house is actually under contract right now for $15 million, just north of Chicago. Russell Wilson, the NFL quarterback, sold his place in the Seattle suburbs for $31 million this year. It was only on, I think, 1.5 acres of land. What would Yosemite cost if it were on the market?
I mean, when you think of the economic driver that Yosemite is to the whole region and what it generates and people coming, and I mean, Yosemite would be worth billions, tens of billions of dollars. And then you think that Cochamó is roughly the same size.
Yeah, it's when you think of the grand scheme, it's quite affordable.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, these links you sent, I'm like, who the fuck is Adam Newman? You know what I mean? And that's really, to me, the real point is that there are random people out there owning $20 million homes. And I'm like, I haven't even heard of them, don't know anything about them, don't freaking care about them. And you're kind of like, if some rando is buying a $20 million house, we should be able to scrounge up this kind of money for conservation, for stuff that really matters.
There are roughly 3,000 billionaires on this planet, and Tati Sandoval was not one of them.
A nosotros pensamos, oye, ¿y qué pasa si...
We thought, hey, what if we looked for help to buy Puchiguin to get it out from under this threat? We started to think it's not that crazy, because maybe there would be more organizations like the Freya Foundation that would want to help. And the question was, do we wait around to see who buys it, or do we try it ourselves? Because the worst thing that could happen is that, I don't know, 5 years down the line, we look back and say, but how did we not do anything? How did we not try to do something?
In 2022, the coalition of Pueblo Patagonia, with the support of the Valle Cochamó organization, did something astounding, akin to building the parachute on the way out of the plane.
We offered him $50 million. We didn't have even $1 in our pockets. So we are trying to make our poker hand and see what happens. So he replies saying, no, thanks. But for $100 million, maybe we have a deal. So we didn't have the money. We didn't have any partners yet for the Conservationists project.
Right about the same time, the Freya and Weiss foundations had purchased another parcel of land at the head of Cochamó Valley. And they asked the local organizations, hey, what else is going on? What else is on your radar?
And we said to them, hey, this is happening.
To lead an acquisition like this is massive. And when it was listed on Christie's for $150 million, it might as well have been $2 billion. It was a number that was so unobtainable to them and their experience that it was just out of reach.
Sí, todavía.
Pueblo Patagonia had to look for help from other organizations, especially on the technical matters, because we hadn't done this before. But there are other organizations out there that have. We weren't inventing the wheel. And that's why other NGOs were invited, like the Nature Conservancy, Weiss, Patagonia, the Freya Foundation.
The Tompkins had provided a blueprint. And maybe, if a coalition could be built from the ground up, there could be a lasting win for the community, climbers, the region, and the planet.
When a foundation like Weiss came in and said, we're in for 15,
that's $15 million.
Suddenly, it became real, right? And then Nature Conservancy became more interested. And then the project flipped from being impossible, we don't even know where to start, to suddenly like, this is incredible. I want to be a part of the winning team here. And that flip, I think, in projects like this can be one of the hardest things, going from this is insurmountable to we believe we can, yes, we can.
There was the beginning of this alliance that they say, okay, let's explore this opportunity. Let's see what's happened and let's start an official negotiation. On March, we received a call.
It's a friend who can connect Jose with Hageman directly.
I take a plane and go to Santiago and I meet him. I didn't meet him before.
You nervous? Did that feel like a big step?
Yes, because it was the first time that I was speaking with my 10 years adversary. So I didn't know what to expect. So my only expectation was, okay, this will not be nice, but let's go and see what's happened. And it was like that. It was like a cat fight, the first meeting. It was not so nice. Nothing nice, really. It was not about the Hacienda Pocheguin. It was about the past.
So how did you guys get past that?
We talk a lot. So I start traveling maybe once every 2 weeks, once a month to Santiago to talk with him, because we were like, okay, how do we approach the next meeting? What we can offer to him, what he wants. So I was the face of our side, but I was with a lot of people behind me that helped me to develop the strategy of the negotiation. So, okay, the second meeting was like the important step, because it was, okay, let's go and see the future and not be in the past for eternity. Okay, whatever happened in the past, that's it. We can't do anything about that. But what if we, in a good faith, explore this opportunity? So he let me know what he was thinking. I let him know that I was representing a conservation alliance, not a business side. So he understand that here was a real opportunity of making a deal, but with a long-term conservation of the same Hacienda Pocheguin. I think that was one of the important things that he saw in us, that we were not like playing around. We want to develop communities. We want to work with tourists, with good tourists. So he understands that.
You know, when in the other interviews, when we've heard about Roberto Hageman, I sort of imagine him as the villain, you know, like in the expensive suit, smoking his cigar. Is that what he looks like? Is he kind of the villain?
Well, when you are fighting against a businessman for 10 years, yes, you imagine that kind of villain.
Yeah.
At the end, I have the chance to know the man behind the face. He told me about his past, his passion, why he put his eyes on Hacienda Puchiguín. He was traveling to Cochamó County, traveling around Hacienda Puchiguín by horse, by hiking. So he didn't climb, but he loved nature in his way.
Do you think as a result of that, he wound up caring about the conservation side of it more than he would have?
He understands development in another way that maybe us. He's older generation, 70 plus years. So he sees the development of a society in another way. For example, in one of the meetings, he said to me, hey, we can put a green light on the dam project, and the dam project can pay all the maintenance of this conservation project. And I was, no, man, this is not the way that we want to do things. He realized that we're a grassroots NGO, very small, maybe not resources like him, give a really nice battle in courts. So he realized that whoever bought this property, maybe we are gonna be like there to approve or not who will be the next owner, because we want a good neighbor.
Basically, Pueblo Patagonia had already defeated Hageman in court once, and they weren't afraid to do it again, which made the property both harder to develop and harder to sell. And maybe to a lesser extent, there was also Hageman's legacy. It's worth noting that we reached out to Hageman via email for his perspective, but never received a response.
So he realized that this was his opportunity to make an exit of this long-term investment and say, okay, I will make my profit, but also I will pass the baton to a new generation of conservation. I know that this deal make him happy, to him and his family, and that's a good thing for him. Because all this time that we were fighting against this dam project, he was the face, the devil of the Cochamó County. So when you see your father, your husband, your uncle, your family appearing in the news like being the bad guy, it's not a comfortable way to see your relatives. He's a businessman with a part of his heart loving the nature. That's why we end in a really good deal that we hope we can deliver.
Hageman and Jose, the two people who had been almost mortal enemies for 10 years, kept talking, and they agreed on an option to buy $68 million. They have until June of 2025 to come up with the money. And the coalition behind the grassroots effort has grown. The Nature Conservancy, Weiss Foundation, Freya Foundation, Patagonia, the company. This week, the coalition got news. They brought in another $10 million, bringing it up to a total of $32 million committed to the effort. So just under half of the money, with less than 6 months to go.
One of our most important goals for Pueblo Patagonia is that Chileans can support hopefully half of the money for the purchase. So we are working in a strategy here to work with of course, with the wealthiest families, but also in a way that everybody can feel part of the project, not being less if you give $10 or $1,000. You feel part of something. Mm-hmm. Everybody wants to be part of something. Hopefully, like us, there will be other persons in other parts of Chile or maybe the world. And if this project succeeds, maybe this structure, this alliance could be replied in other parts of the world.
Any number of entities could liquidate assets and throw down $50 million. There are some foundations that are set up to make these kinds of donations, and certainly that could relatively easily write a check for the remaining amount. One thing that's interesting in this kind of philanthropy is that's not really how foundations think and individuals think. That no one wants to be alone. Everyone's looking for leverage. Everyone's looking to make smart plays.
It's just a few pieces kind of fell into place that accelerated all of this long pent up movement, you know? And suddenly it was like 0 to 60 and here we are. Like Doug Tompkins said, you know, a few good people put their shoulder to the wheel for a long time and put their effort in. And that constant pressure is pretty powerful. That means we got to raise $68 million. Let's freaking do this thing.
People like being a part of something. And that's true if you're a visiting dirtbag climber, or you're someone working a 9-to-5 that dreams of one day visiting Patagonia and climbing in Cochamó. Or maybe you even have the resources to throw $10 million at a project like this. There's some of you out there could. If this coalition doesn't make the first cut, the price slowly creeps up over the course of a few years. But the agreement starts the beginning of something new. A chance to build a national park from the ground up where the voices of the locals are heard. Tourism is invited in and managed in sustainable ways.
En estos 2 años debería poderse recaudar este dinero.
In these 2 years, we should be able to raise the money. In the meantime, we're raising awareness about the project within the community, asking people what they'd like to see happen in the valley, so that when we succeed in purchasing it, we have a clear vision of what the community wants. Because today, establishing a protected area has to include the people who live there. You can't just conserve land to conserve land. The social benefit has to be reflected in this project.
You don't just come here and be a tourist, you know, that is not what makes Cochamó special. Like if you just want to climb, you know, whatever, probably go to El Chalten or something where it's like splintered cracks. You go to Cochamó in part because you can have a role there. You can play a part. You can be a member of really a dynamic conservation movement that has pieces and players all over the world. For me, that was very enticing and very special. We have the opportunity now to create a new model of conservation that will be a step forward at this time, right? And so a lot of the indigenous communities that have called this area home for a long time are still there, right? The Mapuche people are still present. They've still been campaigning for a lot of these conservation causes very successfully. They were a huge part in the prevention of the dam on the Rio Manso. So that's a step forward from Yosemite. What we're trying to do here is not stay in the model of the past. We're trying to create a better, more modern model. And I'm sure it won't be perfect, but it will be better than what we did in the past.
Thanks Tati, Jose, Chris, and Brady for taking the time to sit down with us. You can be a part of this movement by donating. It could be $10 or 10 million, right? This will get built together, and we all have a part to play. Visit conservationists.org to donate. There's a link in the show notes. Check it out, and it'll be easier. It'll take you right there. Look for it. Climbing Gold and the Dirtbag Diaries are a production of Duct Tape Then Beer. Alex Honnold is our host, reporting today by Lauren Delaney Miller, me Fitzcahal, and Laura Izaza, who also helped with scripting and editing. Laura, she also did the translations. Additional editing and sound design and mixing by Evan Phillips. Skylar Perwins is our YouTube and social media editor. Music today by Brendan O'Connell, Graham Barton, Soft Light, Joya, Love Jones, Drexler, Dame Asu, and Marcus Huber. Tracks are courtesy of the Artists or Track Club. Our executive producers are Jonathan Redzik and Ben Endy for RXR Sports, and Lisi Hendricks and Becca Cahal for Duct Tape Then Beer. Thanks for listening.